Hello, I am here this evening for our AskALLi Writing Life Salon, as we are now calling it, with Mr. Dan Blank. Hello, Dan.
Hello, how are you today?
I am very well, and hello to everybody. Today we're going to be talking about creative assets for authors, and this is something that's changed a lot for authors in recent years. Thinking about this has changed in the Alliance of Independent Authors, and my own personal thinking and my own writing has changed a lot as well. And one of the reasons we talk about assets and talk about creative assets is that it gives us a very good lens through which to enter all the various challenges that we have as indie authors. So, Dan, you were talking before we came on air, just to kind of kick this conversation off, a little bit about how the book gets that sort of attention from authors, and they understand clearly that the book itself is a creative asset, but maybe that's where it begins and ends for too many people.
Yeah, so, and you made a similar point where if you're publishing, you're entering into a business. And I think that a lot of people, they want that book because they know why they want to write, what they want to write. And everything else is they create this narrative that they're forced into, which is like, fine, I'll do the marketing, but only because I have to. And they say, well, I need a website, so I'm going to have my nephew create that for me. And I'm told I've got to do this, so I'm going to try something that I read about. And they sort of begrudgingly do it in a non-strategic way, and they don't really own it. And I think that if you want to build a career as an author, however you define that, whether it's big career, little career, or something in between, it's sort of that point of really treating this like it's not a business from, it doesn't have to be a full business, but treating it professionally, I guess, is the proper way to say it.
Yeah, the way I like to think about it is that it's a creative business, and creative businesses are different. So while a lot of us, including me when I started, are a bit scared of the business word, and I come from a business-minded family. My brother's in accountancy, another one in insurance, another one was an engineer, and my parents ran a business, and I was the kind of creative in the middle of all that. And I grew up totally being defined as different, both by them and by myself. Which was, yeah. So, and I don't think that's unusual. So when business reared its head for me at first, it was something that I kind of really bristled against and thought, no, that's not why I do this. I do this to go get away from all that, to go beyond all that in my head. But the more I kind of, and this happened very much as an indie author. I mean, in previous lives, I kept the two separate. That was my business, it earned my money, and over here was my creative work, and that was all the fun stuff. But becoming an indie author really kind of challenged me in terms of bringing those two together. And it has been fantastic. And what I've come to understand is the creative business is different. Digital tools lighten up a lot of the stuff that we naturally perhaps are not good at or resist or don't want to do, leaving a lot of what has to be done in terms of creating assets outside of the book to be creative activities in themselves. Is that your experience?
Yeah. So this is something I talk to writers about a lot too, is like you're always pulling from the same well. So if you're creating a brand, creating a website, creating a newsletter, you've got to be careful. You don't want that to pull from the same place that is writing your novel. So we won't get to it on this call, but just that idea of time management and defining tasks and what's business, what's marketing, which I know you've talked about, the kind of the three different hats. But I agree, there is that way of thinking about how are you investing in the process of your career beyond the book itself? And how do you define these things in a strategic manner? And I guess for me is like, maybe one way I think about it is public facing, things that could be a business asset that people see, and then even internal. And one thing I was thinking, like an internal asset is something like a brand book. And I've hired people to help me create that. I've created it where we say, well, who are you as a writer? And you're like, well, and just some long thing flows out and we don't really know. And the idea of a brand book is saying, I write this for this audience. This is how I describe it. This is how I get it out there. Like, you really defined that. And that brand book, even though it's internal, it's an asset. It's an asset that you can hone and evolve over time. And it's something that it's like a foundation for your life. If you go to any company, they have a mission statement, they have company values, they have codes of conduct. And that stuff does become the thing that pulls it all together. And that's a very soft thing, but it's just a very clear example.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, or it appears to be soft, but actually it's core, and it is an asset. And I think these are some of the things that we haven't been trained to think about or encouraged to think about. It doesn't turn up a lot in the books for writers, and I think it's absolutely essential. So, that your brand is an asset that is distinct from your marketing assets, which are something else. Again, brand falls in under that category of marketing, but it is something that is very distinct and of itself. Similarly, the process you use to put your books together and to get your books made and to get your books to market and to get the rights from those books sold to rights buyers, each of those processes is in itself an asset that is deserving of your attention. And sometimes we fall into those processes and those assets, but an asset, the definition of it is an asset is something that puts money into your pocket, essentially, without you having to be in the room. So those processes, once they are up and running, you can often hand parts of them to a team member who can do them more easily than you. And not all of it, obviously, but those parts. If you don't understand the process, if you haven't identified that this process of getting my stuff to market, it takes time, it takes energy, it takes investment, it is an asset. And how do I ensure that I kind of make the most of this asset? And that's why thinking about creative assets is so useful, because it makes us think about what we do. It makes us look in a spirit of inquiry at what we are doing and experimenting a bit to see what actually works better, what we can do, what we can drop, what we can delegate, and what we can maybe put off for a while or maybe defer forever. Yeah, so
But just to add on
yes,
to that,
please.
I was thinking of what you were saying there in terms of like, I'll create like a book launch plan for someone or with an author. And what it helps us figure out is, where do you invest money? What are you going to do? Like, one thing we'll define is all the things you could do. And it's like a process document. It's an asset. We pick from that, and then we identify, like, what's the publicist going to do? Or should you hire a publicist? If you do, we want these 4 things. This is what you're going to do. You've got to hire a social media manager for that. This is what the publisher is going to do. Should you invest in ad dollars? Okay, this is where it goes and how you want to think about that. And the nice thing about it being an asset as well is now this becomes a template to use for the next book launch, or even a related launch. It doesn't always have to be a book. So you're not always recreating the wheel or feeling like, how many authors you talk to, you're like, tell me about your book launch. And they're like, oh my gosh, what a mess. And it's this like long story that's like, it just sort of unfolds like. And the problem I have with that is that they don't feel good about it. They don't feel they walked away with a process that they're now making better, a sense of how they want to collaborate with people, where they would or wouldn't invest next time. And you're right, a really great way of judging this is money on the table. Is this investing in your career as a writer, or is it sapping energy and resources from it?
Yeah. And another useful thing is to think about it in terms of the commercial profit and the creative satisfaction, the creative pleasure, sense of purpose, mission, passion, all of that side. Look at it, examine it through that lens, and then also examine it through the lens of profit. Which way of approaching this will actually yield better commercially and creatively. And you find that sort of place in the middle where those two things meet, like a sort of a Venn diagram. That middle place is very often the most valuable place for you to be, and it helps you to kind of concentrate the mind, because there are so many different ways we can approach, for example, a book launch or a book production or any of the things that we can do as authors. We're not now lacking in choice. We're absolutely spoiled for choice and overwhelmed by choice. And so thinking about each of these processes as assets and thinking about them through the commercial lens, through the creative lens, and where those two come together can be a way to cut through a lot of the noise and for you to find your own individual place in that.
Yeah, it's funny. Something I think a lot about is this idea of choosing what to write. And this is different for everyone, but I've talked to so many authors, like in my podcast, where we'll talk about the journey to their first or second or third book publication. And there's that tough thing. A lot of writers you talk to, and they say, I wrote this book because it had to be written. It came from here. And I love that. I think we all love that. The book has to be written. Yet I talk to so many authors who talk about, well, this was the first book and I spent 3 years working on it. Then I spent another 2 years working on it. Then it's in a drawer because my agents and I realized this book is never going to sell. So we came up with an idea, or I came up with an idea that was more commercial, and that became the book that launched me. It did really well. And I feel like we maybe have to step a little lightly here because we don't want to offend people, but there is that idea of even at times what you write and is your expectation being sold in the marketplace? Does that define what you write? Or do you get to write what you want, but you change your expectations? Because I'm sure you might have talked to a lot of people like I have where they're excited about their book and they just assume it's going to catch fire. Yeah, and if it doesn't catch fire, they're not a little disappointed, they're massively disappointed. And I hate when writers are disappointed. It makes me so sad.
It's so true. It seems to be, especially on that first book, and I think this is another thing that we have to think about is the length of the journey, and that each step on the way is improving not just the content of the work, but all the processes around it, and therefore is building and deepening and growing these assets that we have as authors. And the sooner we can get beyond first book syndrome, the better. And it, to my mind, I don't think anybody could have told me this when I was going through my own first book syndrome. So, this is probably a waste of breath, but I'm going to say it anyway. People seem to come into this business either wearing a mindset that says, I'm going to make a fortune, I'm going to give the market what it wants, and I'm going to be a Kindle millionaire. Or else they come in as the type of writer that you're talking about with the book needs to be done. It's risen up through me. I have to write it, and I have to write it this way. And there is no other way. And each of those, the further you are to the edge of either of those positions, probably the harder time you're going to have.
I love that.
Are you laughing because you agree?
Yeah, I'm laughing. Yeah. And this is what I look for. Like I'll follow someone like John Green or Emily Giffin, who are novelists, and they will talk. I remember Emily last year was finishing up her book, or maybe it was the year before, and she was sharing the edits, how they happened. And she shared screenshots of how her editor came in and challenged her on the whole ending, and Emily changed the ending and just the thread of it. And she's like, thank goodness my editor saved this book. And it always jumps out at me because it shows, and she's, best-selling author, the whole thing, where we sometimes for our own work feel like that is hampering the product, that's selling out, that's not honoring my muse. And you look at a professional writer who we want to be, and we realize they have collaborators and they rely on those collaborators. And those collaborators don't just send a tweet. They can change a whole scope of a book. They are partners in the process. And maybe you don't want that, which is totally fine, but it might change how you think about the business of publishing. And to your point, the asset that you're creating here, which is what are your expectations with that? And what is your process for creating it?
And the thing is, if you run a business as an author and you rely on that, then you have to actually begin to think a bit about other people. If you're writing the book for pure personal creative pleasure, that's fine, but that's not generally the people that we're talking to here. We're talking to people who want to, who are already selling well and reaching readers, but maybe overwhelmed, overtired, overstretched, and not really sure of what they're doing and how they're doing it. And I guess that's what we're offering this as a way to begin to think about what you're doing that can stop the busy work and all the running around and can help you to get core about what it is you do. Because that kind of passion and mission that you bring to that first book, that can be expressed in 1,000 different ways. It won't just be expressed in one book if you're going to build a business as an author, if you're going to actually live the writing life and become an independent author in that way. It can't happen with one book. No one book is powerful enough to do that almost. So, it's such an outlier that we don't aim for that in any way. So a really useful way to think about the assets that you are creating is to look under 3 different kind of headings. And one is the craft assets. And so that's the stuff that you make. It's the producer hat that you wear when you're working on that. It's the maker. So that is the book, the stuff that goes around the book, like the social media pictures and the cover and all that kind of stuff. Anything that is you as the maker. Then there is the you as the manager, and that is where we get into the process stuff. That's where you look at your financial arrangements. How do you pay yourself? How do you set up your money so that it flows the way you need it to flow in order to put yourself out there again the next time? The kinds of processes that we were talking about earlier, producing the book, and the tech that you use, the tools that you're going to use. These are the sorts of assets that the process manager thinks about. And then there are the promotional assets, and they are the kinds of things that we were talking about under marketing and branding and anything you use that takes your book. It's the channels also that you will use to take your book out to a wider audience. So we constantly keep referring back to those 3 hats and examining what we're doing in terms of, which hat am I wearing right now and what is the optimal kind of mind mode that this hat needs me to have, because they are slightly different. We want to bring our creativity into all of them because this is creative business. It doesn't have to be business as usual. It doesn't have to be mechanistic. It doesn't have to be horrible and boring. But at the same time, it's not the same if you're kind of doing your banking and doing your book. no matter how creative and nice you make your bank statements.
It's funny, we're recording this just after tax day here in the US. And it's the day where you see a lot of updates about people who are freaking out or surprised by if they did prepare well enough, didn't prepare well enough. I was having a conversation with some writers in my mastermind group about that, where they'll even have financial professionals that they hire, and those professionals gave them advice, but they didn't really follow the advice. And I think because a lot of us, we're scared of processes. We're scared of anything having to do with finance or business. We're scared of even simple things. I mean, how many writers have I talked to who will do a newsletter and it's like always like, well, I write it on deadline. I use a system that someone set up for me 9 years ago, and I just cross my fingers that it keeps working. It's almost a sense of are they taking enough ownership? And I think a big point to make here is the value of having collaborators. It doesn't mean you have to hire a marketer, hire an accountant, hire all these people. You can. But it's almost this idea of, are you talking to other people about How do they manage their business? How do they create a marketing budget? How do they develop the process for their content strategy that fills in their website, their blog, their podcast, their Twitter? I find that even having conversations with other professionals is a massive step forward, mostly because you're admitting to yourself and to the world, oh, this is a business. And as you're saying, I need to treat these as assets. And I don't know what's going to work just by reading a lot of blog posts. I actually have to talk to people who are in it. And like you and me, or I mean, I'll speak for myself, like the work I do, this is it. This is my full-time job. It is the only thing that supports my family. And what's great about that is like, I have to figure it out. But it also means I'm in a lot of conversations with people about, gosh, what's the right way to do this? And I find that those conversations are kind of magical because it opens up hearing stories about what works. I admit where my own fears are. I learn. And it's not just in this idea of, oh, I read a book about how you manage an author career. You've talked to people about it. And that reality, it just adds such a richness to how you actually develop that for yourself.
Absolutely. By the way, if anybody has any questions about any of this, we can take questions now, between now and the end of the show. But it's so interesting that you raise the topic of fear, because I think that is so central here when it comes to doing a lot of this stuff. I mean, I spoke there about my own fear of business, anything that wore a business hat, and I ran out of the room for years, But I think wherever we're feeling that kind of discomfort, something golden lies buried there. And we do, as you rightly say, if we're not managing it ourselves, we kind of know we should be, because we get that feeling that tells us we should, and then we don't act on it and we feel guilty, and then we ignore it and we feel more guilty. And it's a huge creative suck. It just drains so much creative energy, all that whole thing. And the key is other people, and be it the people that you're working for and their feedback. I think we often don't ask enough what they look for from us and what they need and want from us, or somebody else who's done it extraordinarily well. And I'm really interested that you talked about magic as well, because I do think when we talk about this stuff with our logical minds, and even as I'm talking now, I'm kind of frightening myself because it does all sound like too much. How can any one person be expected to do it? Yet it is done all the time. The Alliance of Independent Authors is crammed with people who are successfully managing to do this. Loads of people who are successfully managing to do this. How? Because of magic. Creative magic comes in somewhere along the line when we show up, and when we show up for the stuff that scares us or makes us deeply uncomfortable, but we know we need to go there. And we show up in the proper way, with a really open heart and an open mind in those kinds of conversations that you're talking about. Magic definitely does come in the door and carries us along. I've seen it again and again.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things I'm thinking about that. And one is uncovering, well, how to, if you're someone who wants to find success as an author, and especially financial success, which you're alluding to, I love the idea of actually figuring out, well, how do authors actually earn money? And a lot of times there's a perception, and the reality is really different than the perception. And we have a lot of people in your community who are uncovering that, which is amazing. And the other thing too is having a relationship or a connection with someone who will kind of really show you how it's done. And I always think back, I think I've told this story before, where when I was first starting my business, I think I was trying to figure out how to price a service that's related to what I do. And I remember a really specific thing. And I reached out to people who were in my network, and we sat down across, and I was like, look, I could really use your help. You're experienced. Like, this is what I'm trying to figure out. This is where I'm pricing it. Like, I don't know where I'm at with it. Any advice? And I sat across some people who wouldn't help me. They would give me like a phrase, like an ism, like, whatever you're thinking, double it. Like weird things like that, where I'm like, okay, but this is literally what I have to send out tomorrow, and I'm not sure. I don't want to lose it. And I remember the moment when someone just showed me their rate sheet. They really said, look, I'm going to share this with you. It's what I actually charge. It's how I discount, whatever. And that was magical, because it was like this thing that was kept from me was opened up. And it was just someone not sharing the world's greatest rate sheet. it was just showing me a rate sheet that they're using in the real world. And that type of a thing was magical because it got me to think about, how do I actually do this? And how does someone else actually do it in real life? And I think it's where we start confronting a lot of things that we read online. Like, one thing I read a lot is this idea of, never do anything for free, always charge for your work. And I've seen talks and read blog posts and articles that are so moving and true with that. Yet, all the time I interview people who will talk about how they have not charged for something to get an opportunity, and it led to a major insight and a major thing, and their whole career took off because they didn't charge, and they were happy they didn't charge. And I think that knowing that sometimes realizes that it's not just one or the other. It's not just something that sounds good. There's a practical reality to how we manage these assets.
Absolutely. And creatives have always operated within a gift economy. And in a sense, we offer out our gifts. And yes, of course, we charge for certain aspects of it. But gifting, I think, comes naturally to the creative. And as you say, it opens many doors. And so how we think about this and how we approach it, how we create that individual, person-shaped, U-shaped business that just reflects exactly who you are. So of course, if you need to put food on the table, you can't afford to be going around giving everything away. And anyway, I would argue that even if you are doing really, really well, giving everything away is not a good idea for all sorts of reasons, not least because it devalues things for everybody else. And there is so much smoke and mirrors around publishing and book writing, and we're sharing so much, and yet so much that is key to our progress is not always being shared, or people want to put their best foot forward, and that's very understandable. But there are certainly times for hearing the truth. So you, for example, we're talking there about how authors make money. Very, very, very few authors make money from book sales alone. And almost all of them who do are in a very popular genre like romance, or some of the, the high selling nonfiction genre. It is very unusual. One book, yes, certainly, but over a lifetime, over a career, almost every author has something else going on. And traditionally that was the day job that kind of funded the writing. But now that can be brought into your business in a way that takes the passion and mission that's going into the book and creates something that is a bit of a more premium product, to use the business people's language for a minute, than a book, because books are very low margin, again, to use another business term. I mean, is there another product that takes so long to do well, that costs so little? And even if we compare it to other forms of entertainment, it's very, very cheap for the amount of hours entertainment that it gives us, or the information, the inspiration. It can be life-changing. And of course, we can't put a price on all of that, but we can certainly, I see authors becoming successful in their businesses when they get three key assets in place. One is a good product for prospects, again, to use a business term. So the magnet that will draw people towards the work. The second is the core product, the books, and getting those right. And then this premium product, when that comes into the ecosystem, be it a course or some teaching arising out of your work or whatever it might be, when that comes in, that's when people begin to become financially comfortable. But something also happens is that their mission is deepened, their passion is expanded. This premium product is much more than just a way to make money. It is actually a way to do things in a different way that maybe involves more of that magic connection with people that you're talking about than sitting for years on end in the study with your imaginary friends.
It's funny, there's an illustrator and author who I've interviewed and followed for a while, Jake Parker, and he's very much in the illustration world, even though he's an author as well. And he has this video in the illustration community. There was a big thing of saying, I'm going to create a project. I'm going to do 30 days of cartooning, or 30 days of this, or 100 days of that. I'm going to create a project. And his video was, you need a product, not a project. And some of the points he made, I'm not going to remember every one of them, but was this idea that when you put value on it, when you assign a price, when you create it with this idea of saying, I'm going to sell this, you learn so much more about the life cycle of a creative business. You start thinking of, well, gee, so I've got my novel, what else could I sell? It doesn't have to be big. It could be small. It could be another mini book, a novella, a short story. It could be a how-to book. It could be something silly. You start thinking of what could a product be, and you go through the whole lifestyle of how will I create that, how will I upload it, how will I price it, and you learn so much along the way about your branding and the marketing. And if you're uploading it to a different type of, if you've used Amazon before, but now this is something that's on another downloadable site, or if it's a service, you sort of really dig into this idea. And in the process, you're creating, as you say, it's like an asset that could earn money. It could expand your brand, and you're learning all these other phases to it. I always love that idea of challenging someone where there's so much there about the gift economy, this idea of sharing online, but the idea of creating a product and thinking of how you create more products, I think is intriguing. And just one other riff on that, where a podcast I follow, Writing, they interviewed Grammar Girl, who I'd heard a lot about before, never really knew much about. And I just went to her Twitter, and right up top was all of these guides, all of these assets and products that she has created around what I think might have started as a podcast. And I just saw that, and in an instant I said, look at that. She has created a company, a brand. She's created all these assets that you can buy around just this concept of good grammar. And I thought it was such a wonderful example, really what embodies what I think we're talking about today.
Absolutely. And if you can do it for grammar, you can do it for anything. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice here. I have a cold at the moment.
Oh, sorry about that.
Excuse me. So yeah, if you are interested in this topic, I'm actually going to be doing a deep dive into it on my own website in about half an hour's time. If you want to go over, we'll be doing a workshop that looks not just for writers, but for all creatives, how these different assets can be used and exploited and enjoyed and created and developed. And so yeah, if the topic is of interest to you, do come on over to my Facebook page, Orna Ross page. And next week, next month, Dan and I will be back with another writing life topic. So if you have any questions arising out of today's, just leave them in the questions and comments, and we will get to them. And yes, we have a question as to whether the replay will be available, and the answer is yes, that it will. So before we leave, Dan, can you just tell people if they want to find out more about you and what you do and how you do it?
Sure. You can always find me at WeGrowMedia.com, where, I run different programs, and I have a weekly blog and newsletter really helping writers. A lot of topics like this, the idea of connecting with your audience and kind of the creative process behind it. And on all the social media, I'm at Dan Blank.
Lovely. And we are the Alliance of Independent Authors. We are a non-profit association for self-publishing writers. If you haven't joined us yet, you might want to think about take a look at our site on allianceindependentauthors.org. All right, so that's it from us for this month. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.